What if I told you that love could lead to murder? And not just any murder, but a case so shocking, so twisted, that it left even the most seasoned detectives speechless. This is the story of a teenage boy, his 61-year-old bride, and the deadly obsession that ended with a gruesome discovery in a place no one ever expected. The romance that shocked a community. Let's rewind to the beginning. Our story takes place in a small but bustling town in Georgia. This isn't your average sleepy southern town. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone's business, especially in the close-knit black community. Families gathered at the same church every Sunday, neighbors swapped stories over backyard fences, and the local barber shop was practically a town hall. In this kind of place, secrets had a way of slipping out, no matter how carefully you tried to keep them. You see, 18-year-old Jamal Brooks had always been the golden boy. Tall, athletic, and full of charm, he was the type of teenager who could walk into a room and make everyone laugh. Teachers loved him, his classmates looked up to him, and the older folks in the community often said he had an old soul. Jamal had a way of making everyone feel special, whether it was helping his younger siblings with homework or cracking jokes to lighten his mum's stressful days. But beneath the charm was a boy weighed down by responsibility. Jamal was also a dreamer, always talking about leaving town, starting his own business and making a better life for himself and his family. He would sit on the porch with his best friend, Marcus, and talk for hours about the future. "One day, I'm going to open my own sneaker store," Jamal once said, staring out at the horizon. "Not just selling shoes, though, designing them. Like Jordan or Kanye, you'll see." Marcus would laugh, saying, "Man, you're going to forget all about us when you're rich and famous." But Jamal would shake his head. "Nah, I'm taking everyone with me." Still, dreams don't always pay bills. Jamal came from a struggling household. His mother, Tanya, worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, flipping pancakes at the local diner in the mornings and cleaning office buildings at night. She was a strong woman, fiercely independent, but even the strongest people have limits. Jamal's younger siblings, Malik and Anaya, depended on him. He would pick Malik up from basketball practice, help Anaya with her science projects, and cook dinner on nights when his mom was too tired to stand. College was a distant dream without scholarships, and Jamal knew that unless something changed, he'd be stuck in the same cycle of struggle that his family had always known. So, when Jamal started spending time with 61-year-old Claudine Westbrook, the wealthy owner of a chain of restaurants in the area, people noticed. Claudine wasn't just rich, she was powerful. She owned 3 popular soul food joints in the region, and her name carried weight. If you wanted a job, you hoped she'd take a liking to you. If you wanted to make connections, you tried to impress her at one of her legendary charity events. She wasn't just a businesswoman, she was a force of nature, always immaculately dressed, her sharp tongue tempered by a sweet southern drawl that made even her harshest critics sound like compliments. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Claudine had a history of mentoring young entrepreneurs and offering jobs to local teens. She was always talking about giving back to the community and helping the next generation. So when Jamal started working at one of her restaurants, no one thought much of it. But then the rumors started. Whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs became full-blown gossip. "Did you hear about Jamal and Miss Westbrook? She bought him a car. Ebony were holding hands at the diner last night." People started noticing things. The way Claudine looked at Jamal during church service, the expensive sneakers he suddenly started wearing, the afternoons he'd spend at her house, talking business. It didn't take long for the whispers to reach Tanya. At first, she dismissed them. "My son isn't like that," she told a co-worker. "He's just working for her." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. And then the bombshell dropped. Jamal and Claudine weren't just friends or business associates. They were in love. Or at least, that's what Jamal told everyone. The announcement shocked the entire town. Jamal didn't just confirm the rumors, he doubled down. He showed up to church one Sunday holding Claudine's hand, a big grin on his face as if daring anyone to say something. "Age is just a number," he told his best friend, Marcus, when asked about it. "She gets me in a way no one else does." Marcus didn't know how to respond. What could you say to your best friend when he was walking straight into a storm and you didn't know how to stop him? For Jamal, Claudine represented more than just a relationship. She represented stability, opportunity, and a future he could never have imagined for himself. But for everyone else, the relationship was controversial at best and downright scandalous at worst. The wedding that turned heads. To say the community was shocked would be an understatement. On a warm spring day, Jamal and Claudine stood in front of a small group of friends and family and said, "I do." Jamal, in his ill-fitting rented tuxedo that seemed one size too big, and Claudine, in an elegant white gown adorned with intricate lace, looking as though it had been custom-made and worth more than Jamal's entire life savings. The contrast was stark. The age gap, a staggering 43 years. The crowd murmured, the guests exchanged awkward glances, and some couldn't help but snap pictures to gossip about later. To some, it felt less like a celebration of love and more like a spectacle. For Claudine, this was her fourth marriage. Her first 3 husbands were all wealthy businessmen, and when they passed away, each left her with a fortune so vast that she could buy just about anything she wanted. And now it seemed she wanted Jamal. Not a new luxury car, not another vacation home, not a high professional investment home. Jamal Brooks, an 18-year-old with big dreams and very little else, was her newest acquisition. At least, this project was to begin with her dream. Some people whispered that she wanted to feel young again, while others speculated it was more about control than companionship. But not everyone was convinced this union was about love. Jamal's mother, Tanya, was furious. She refused to attend the wedding and made her feelings very clear to anyone who would listen. "That woman is old enough to be your grandmother, Jamal," she'd shouted during one of their many heated arguments in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. Tanya saw right through Claudine's polished facade. To her, Claudine was a predator, a manipulative woman who had lured her son away from his family with money and promises of a glamorous life. "She's taking advantage of you," Tanya warned him. But Jamal was stubborn. To him, Claudine represented so much more than just a romantic partner. She was security, a ticket out of poverty, and a chance to experience a life he never thought he'd have. With her, he didn't have to worry about overdue bills or stretching every dollar to feed his siblings. He didn't have to stress about working dead-end jobs just to get by. In Claudine's world, Jamal felt important. He felt seen. And maybe, just maybe, he believed she loved him. Still, not everyone was so cynical. Jamal's best friend, Marcus, tried to be supportive, despite his own reservations. "If you're happy, bro, then I'm happy for you," Marcus told him the night before the wedding, though his tone carried an edge of doubt. The community, however, wasn't as kind. People whispered behind their backs, calling the marriage unnatural and shameful. Others were less tactful, accusing Claudine of using her wealth to manipulate a boy young enough to be her great-grandson. And then there were the looks. Wherever Jamal and Claudine went, for a while it seemed like the unlikely couple was defying the odds. Jamal dropped out of community college and stepped into a world he'd only ever dreamed about, managing one of Claudine's restaurants. He seemed to be living the high life, driving around in a brand new Mercedes that Claudine had gifted him, wearing head-to-toe designer outfits, and posting Instagram pictures of lavish dinners and weekend getaways. His captions were always filled with optimism, phrases like "blessed and highly favored" or "living the dream." To the outside world, it looked like Jamal had it all, but behind closed doors, the cracks in their fairy tale marriage were beginning to show. Friends of Jamal later told investigators that something about him seemed different. The carefree, light-hearted teenager they knew now carried a heaviness that was hard to ignore. He seemed stressed, distant, even scared at times. Claudine, they said, had become increasingly controlling and possessive. She didn't like him spending time with friends, calling them distractions, and she became enraged whenever he visited his family without her. "Why do you need anyone else when you've got me?" she'd demand, according to one of Jamal's close friends. Then came the fights. At first, the arguments were confined to whispered accusations, but over time they escalated. Neighbors reported hearing shouting matches late at night, Claudine's sharp, angry voice cutting through the quiet streets. Sometimes they could hear her accusing Jamal of cheating. Other times, the arguments revolved around money. specifically her threats to cut Jamal off financially if he didn't start appreciating her. Once, a neighbor overheard Claudine scream, "You'll be nothing without me," followed by the sound of glass shattering. And just when things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, Jamal disappeared. It was subtle at first. He stopped posting on social media, which was unusual for someone who loved showing off his lifestyle. Friends assumed he was taking a break, and his family thought maybe he just needed some space to clear his head. But as days turned into weeks and there was no sign of Jamal, concern grew. His phone went straight to voicemail, and the Mercedes he once proudly drove was found abandoned in the parking lot of a grocery store. The world that once seemed so perfect on Instagram was beginning to unravel, and those closest to Jamal feared the worst. Something wasn't right. The search for Jamal. At first, no one was too concerned. Jamal was young and impulsive, and it wasn't unlike him to go off the grid for a few days. His friends thought he might have just needed some space from Claudine and her overbearing ways. He probably just needed to clear his head, one friend later said. Even his mother, Tanya, who knew something was off, tried to convince herself that he'd eventually come back home. Jamal had always been a free spirit, and part of her thought that maybe he was just taking time to figure out his next move. But days turned into weeks, and that faint hope began to evaporate. There was no sign of Jamal. His phone went straight to voicemail, a habit that was completely out of character for someone who was glued to his phone. Messages from friends and family went unanswered. And then there was his car. The sleek Mercedes Claudine had gifted him, a symbol of the lifestyle she had dangled in front of him, was found abandoned in the parking lot of a grocery store, sitting there for days without anyone claiming it. A once spotless and meticulously maintained car was now collecting dust. For Tanya, this was the breaking point. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. She wasted no time filing a missing persons report, and the police immediately launched an investigation. Of course, Claudine was the first person they questioned. She put on quite the performance, appearing heartbroken and worried as she recounted her version of events. According to Claudine, Jamal had left after an argument. He said he needed time to think, she explained, her voice trembling just enough to appear convincing. "I've been worried sick about him. I've called him every day. I don't know where he is." She even dabbled in self-pity, lamenting how difficult the past few weeks had been for her, but the police weren't buying it. Claudine's story was riddled with inconsistencies, and her demeanor was off. One detective later described her as too rehearsed, too calm. The pauses she took before answering questions felt calculated, as though she were piecing together the most convincing version of her story on the spot. And while she outwardly portrayed herself as the distressed wife, her lack of urgency about Jamal's disappearance raised eyebrows. Why hadn't she filed her own missing persons report? Why hadn't she rallied more people to search for him? The answers she gave were vague and evasive. Then, the investigation took an even darker turn. While combing through Claudine's financial records, detectives stumbled upon a shocking revelation. Just 2 months before Jamal disappeared, Claudine had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on her teenage husband. Suspicious? Absolutely. To the police, this detail set off alarm bells. Why would Claudine, a woman who was already wealthy and supposedly in love with her young husband, feel the need to take out such a significant policy on him? It wasn't a coincidence, but it also wasn't enough to prove anything. Without concrete evidence, the police couldn't do much more than keep a close eye on Claudine. Still, the case began to attract attention. The media caught wind of the age gap marriage, the missing teenager, and the life insurance policy, spinning it all into a salacious story that the public couldn't get enough of. People speculated wildly about what had happened to Jamal. Some thought he had run away, finally breaking free of Claudine's grip. Others believed something far darker was at play, their suspicions aimed squarely at Claudine. As pressure mounted on law enforcement to find answers, Tanya's grief turned into anger. She was determined to get justice for her son, no matter what it took. You seem to be enjoying the video. Wouldn't you like to subscribe to the channel to enjoy many more just like it? Why don't you do so as the story reaches its ending, a gruesome discovery? The break in the case came from an unexpected source. A sanitation worker named Darnell, who'd been working the same route for over a decade. One humid summer morning, while making his rounds, he noticed a foul smell coming from a dumpster behind one of Claudine's restaurants. At first he thought it was spoiled food, maybe some rotten meat left out too long in the heat. Dumpsters behind restaurants often carried unpleasant odors. But this was different. It was stronger, sharper, almost suffocating. Curious and concerned, Darnell decided to investigate further. He climbed up the side of the dumpster, peering in as he held his nose. What he found made his blood run cold. A human foot sticking out of a torn garbage bag. Panicked, Darnell jumped back, nearly losing his balance before calling the police. When the officers arrived and began sorting through the contents of the dumpster, what they uncovered was nothing short of horrifying. Jamal's dismembered body had been stuffed into several garbage bags and tossed away like trash, as if his life had meant nothing. The sheer brutality of the discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation team. This wasn't just a crime, it was a monstrous act, the final chapter in a life that had been full of dreams, potential, and promise. The community was about to face a truth more chilling than anyone had imagined. The investigation unravels the truth. The discovery of Jamal's body turned the case into a full-blown homicide investigation, and all eyes immediately fell on Claudine. From the very beginning, her behavior had raised suspicions, but now, with a body to account for, investigators ramped up their scrutiny. The evidence against her was damning, almost as if a breadcrumb trail of clues had been left behind for law enforcement to piece together. Surveillance footage showed her car near the dumpster on the night Jamal disappeared, a glaring contradiction to her earlier claims that she had no idea where he could be. Investigators also found forensic evidence. Traces of Jamal's blood were discovered in the trunk of her car, on the interior carpet, and, most damning of all, on a set of knives neatly tucked away in her kitchen drawer. But the most chilling evidence didn't come from a crime scene, it came from Jamal's phone records. Text messages painted a picture of a side of Claudine that few had ever seen before. A manipulative, controlling woman who had been threatening Jamal for weeks leading up to his disappearance. "If you leave me, you'll regret it," read one message. Another was even more sinister. "You're nothing without me, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." The tone of these messages shifted from desperation to outright cruelty, revealing just how deep her possessiveness ran. What started as a relationship she had marketed to the world as unconventional love had devolved into something far darker, a toxic, one-sided obsession. Under mounting pressure and with the weight of evidence closing in, Claudine finally cracked. She confessed to killing Jamal but insisted it was self-defense. According to her story, they had been arguing and Jamal had allegedly become violent, forcing her to act in self-preservation. Her trembling voice and carefully placed tears were a clear attempt to gain sympathy. But investigators and prosecutors weren't buying it. The evidence told an entirely different story. Forensic experts noted that the angle and depth of the knife wounds didn't match Claudine's claims of a struggle. Additionally, there were no signs of defensive wounds on her body, which would have been expected if Jamal had truly attacked her. Instead, the physical evidence suggested something much more sinister. A calculated act of rage. Prosecutors argued that Claudine had lured Jamal into her life with promises of wealth, opportunity, and love. To Jamal, she had represented a way out of poverty, a lifeline to a brighter future. But for Claudine, Jamal was never an equal partner in the relationship. He was a possession, a trophy that she could control. When he finally realized the price of her generosity, his freedom, and decided to leave, she couldn't handle the rejection. She felt humiliated, discarded, and betrayed. And in her mind, there was only one way to ensure that she would never lose control. She snapped, ending Jamal's life in a moment of cold, calculated violence. The evidence painted her as a woman who couldn't accept being told no, someone who would rather destroy what she couldn't keep than let it go. Justice for Jamal. The trial was one of the most talked-about cases in the state, drawing national media attention due to its shocking twists and the sheer audacity of the crime. Claudine's defense team crafted their narrative carefully, portraying her as a frail, elderly woman who was incapable of committing such a brutal and calculated murder. They emphasized her age, her weakened state, and her lifelong contributions to the community, attempting to tug at the heartstrings of the community. Attempting to tug at the heartstrings of the community. Attempting to tug seems a 61-year-old widow with no history of violence, her attorney argued. She's been demonized by the media, but she is no killer. But the jury didn't buy it. The mountain of evidence against Claudine was overwhelming, and her own confessions, though framed as self-defense, didn't line up with the physical and forensic findings. The prosecution presented her as a woman with an obsessive need for control and power, someone who had manipulated a young man into a toxic relationship, and ultimately killed him when he dared to leave. For years, her carefully curated public image of being a generous, mentoring businesswoman crumbled under the weight of her actions. After just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Beaumont. Claudine showed little emotion as the verdict was read. Some reporters noted that she looked more annoyed than remorseful, as though the entire trial had been an inconvenience to her. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would spend the rest of her days behind bars. Her once flawless reputation was in tatters, her empire reduced to nothing more than a scandalous footnote in the state's history. For Jamal's family, the verdict was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring him back. Outside the courthouse, his mother, Tanya, stood surrounded by reporters, her voice breaking as she spoke about her son. "He was just a boy," she said tearfully, clutching a photo of Jamal as a child. He had his whole life ahead of him, and she took that away. He had dreams, ambitions, and so much love to give, and now, because of her, we'll never get to see what he could have become. The community rallied around Tanya and her family, holding candlelight vigils and fundraising events in Jamal's honor. For many, his story served as a grim reminder of how manipulation and power imbalances can lead to tragedy. His friends and family hoped his legacy would live on, inspiring others to recognize the warning signs of toxic relationships and speak out before it was too late. Though Claudine's trial had ended, the ripple effects of the case continued to resonate. For those who knew Jamal, the pain of his loss lingered, but so did the memories of his warmth, his smile, and his unwavering hope for a better future. It was those memories that Tanya vowed to hold onto, even as the reality of her son's absence weighed heavily on her heart. "He was too good for this world," she said softly, looking up at the sky, "but at least now he can rest in peace." The lessons we take. This case is more than just a shocking true crime story. It's a haunting reminder of the dangerous dynamics that can exist beneath the surface of relationships that seem unconventional or even glamorous from the outside. It's a cautionary tale about power, manipulation, and how dangerous it can be when love, or what masquerades as love, is used as a weapon. Jamal's story is heartbreaking because it serves as an example of how easily someone full of hope and ambition can be pulled into a toxic web of control. It's a stark reminder that love should never come at the cost of freedom, and that sometimes the people who appear to have it all together, the ones with wealth, charm, and status, are the ones hiding the darkest and most sinister secrets. Jamal's life was full of potential, and his tragic end forces us to reflect on the importance of listening to the small warning signs in our lives and the lives of others. Would things have been different if someone had intervened earlier? Could his story have ended with him walking away from Claudine's grip? These are the questions that linger long after the case has been closed, and they are ones that should push all of us to pay closer attention to the people we care about. Sometimes the signs of trouble are right in front of us. We just have to be willing to see them, to ask the uncomfortable questions, and to take action when something doesn't feel right. What do you think? Was this a tragic love story gone horribly wrong? Or was it doomed from the start? Was Jamal just a victim of his circumstances? Or was he too blinded by the promise of a better life to see the danger he was stepping into? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever witnessed someone you love caught in a toxic or controlling relationship, what did you do? These are conversations we need to have because stories like Jamal's happen more often than we'd like to believe. If you found this story as gripping and as heartbreaking as I did, Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the dark and twisted world of true crime. These stories are about more than just shock value. They're about learning from the past so we can recognize the signs and prevent similar tragedies in the future. And if you're ready for another jaw-dropping case, click on this video right here. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next. Stay safe, stay alert, and as always, take care of yourselves and those you love. The world can be a scary place, but by looking out for one another, we can make it just a little bit brighter.